Okay, I want to talk for just a moment about measles. And if you know me, if you've been to my practice, if you've ever talked with our team, you already know that our approach is not one of threatening, guilting, shaming, or coercing. We don't make people get vaccines against their will. We don't threaten to withdraw care if they don't vaccinate according to uh, any sort of schedule that they want. And we encourage people to ask questions and be thoughtful. And when they need time, we give them time. And when they need time to think, we give them time to think. And when they have more questions, they usually just text us and we talk it through. Or if they see something on the internet and they're like, what's the deal with this? Is this real? Is this something I need to worry about? They usually just copy a link and text it to us. But one thing that I wanted to talk through is measles because there's some outbreaks going around. And there's been outbreaks for the past several years in the United States. So we know a little about what goes on in the midst of a measles outbreak. Now, measles is super contagious. If you think about influenza or COVID or any of the illnesses that we have a relative frequency with seeing, measles contagiousness is about 7 to 10 times as contagious. Luckily, most people are immune to measles because we have very high vaccination rates in the United States, and the older generations that had measles are also immune. Because the nice thing about measles vaccination or previous infection is that once you're immune, immunity usually sticks around for life or nearly for life. And so we don't worry about measles in people that have been vaccinated, period, because they're not going to get it. And if they're over if they were born before the 60s, we also don't worry about them because they probably had measles, and so they're immune to it as well. Now, there's a couple things that we need to know when we talk about measles and an outbreak because it happens nowadays in the United States and of course around the world too. One thing is hospitalizations. A lot of people think of measles like chickenpox, as if you just get the rash and you're itchy or in pain for a couple days and then it goes away. Like I had chickenpox as a child, not a big deal. Measles is different. 40% of the children in the United States that have had measles in the past few years, like since 2020 and beyond, 40% have been hospitalized because of measles. They either have difficulty breathing, they get a secondary pneumonia, they get dehydrated and need fluids. Those are the main reasons that children are getting admitted into the hospital, but 40%, so 4 out of 10. So if we have a classroom, if we have a daycare room of children that aren't old enough to get vaccinated, and somebody with measles, like sneezes or coughs or walks by or shares the air circulation system, and 10 of those children catch measles because they weren't yet able to get vaccinated, at least 4, and maybe more because they're assuming they're younger, under 12 months of age, haven't had the chance to get a measles vaccine yet, are going to end up in the hospital, which is astronomically larger than COVID. When we think about COVID hospitalization rates or influenza hospitalization rates, it's orders of magnitude higher. So hospitalization is a real risk. Now, the second one is immune amnesia. Over the course of our life, we get to develop all sorts of antibodies and T cells and B cells, which help protect us from the infections that we see. Once you get a cold virus, you get some protection from it. Another cold virus comes by, you catch that one, you get protection from that. You develop those antibodies and B cells and T cells over the course of your life so that when you're young, you get a lot of infections. And when you get to, high school age or college age and beyond, you don't get as many infections. I mean, then you have children who then bring all these new germs that you haven't seen before home from daycare, and you get to get all those. But what we know is that in some cases, measles, the infection, not the like the vaccine, but the infection can cause immune amnesia, where the measles virus kills your B cells and T cells, and so you lose immunity to things that you've previously had. So essentially, it's like you're starting over. It's as if you got chemotherapy that killed all your cells, and then you have to start fresh, and you're immune compromised because of measles. Measles can cause immune amnesia. And as I go through this, I would love for you to not take my word for it. I would love for you to just Google or look up on ChatGPT or whatever sources you like to confirm that these things are the case, because I don't want you to feel like I'm just feeding you a bunch of BS. I get most of my information from my pediatrics medical training, but also from this red book, which is our pediatric infectious disease Bible for pediatrics. It has probably at least 10 pages on measles. There's stuff on leprosy, hookworm infections, hepatitis C. This is where I get my up-to-date information. And so that's immune amnesia. Now, the third one is SSPE, which is the scariest of the complications that we're going to talk about. SSPE stands for subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. And SSPE is years after measles infection. So you have to get measles. It comes years after measles infection. It's highest in children that are under the age, that get measles when they're under the age of 2. And it causes progressive, meaning it gets worse over time, neurological deterioration. So these are children, they had measles when they were 1.5. They are now third graders or fourth graders, and they start to neurologically deteriorate. They can have seizures. They can have developmental delays and regressions. They can have spasms and tight muscles, and eventually it leads to a comatose state and progressive neurological deterioration and is fatal. It's not common. But when we have measles outbreaks and when we look around the world, we do see cases of SSPE. Now it's years later. And so these are children that have grown up and they've started kindergarten and they're, excelling in all of the different things that they do and enjoying life, and their brain starts to deteriorate, and it's not something that we can treat, stop, or reverse. And so it's super scary. Now, it's not super common. It's 1 in 10,000 cases of measles. But if we think about the worldwide population, that's non-zero. And if we continue to have measles outbreaks, one of those outbreaks, there could be a child with SSPE. It's not universal. It's rare, but it's definitely a side effect worth knowing about because it is potentially fatal. And heartbreaking for families to go through is going through that. And if you think back to before the measles vaccine, this was a common thing that happened to your grandparents' friends. Some of them did not make it to adulthood because they got measles when they were 1, and then they died when they were in 3rd or 4th grade from progressive neurological deterioration. That was a part of life back then. And then the fourth one, just to talk about, is risks to pregnant moms and unborn children. So what we know is that moms can get sick from measles if they are unvaccinated and unprotected and get measles. They can end up in the hospital. They can get pneumonia, which is one of the common parts of measles that lands anybody in the hospital. And pregnant moms are especially sensitive to pneumonia and ending up in the hospital from it, and fluid issues and everything along those lines. It can also cause preterm birth, stillbirth, miscarriage, which are just kind of time differences right there. And then there is a condition called congenital measles that can also affect the baby for their entire life. They have developmental delays and seizures and all sorts of issues from being exposed to measles during pregnancy. And so those are the big picture things. I don't mean to scare you, and I don't mean to guilt you, but I do think it's worth knowing the other side of what happens during a measles outbreak and after a measles outbreak. If this has been helpful, comment below, share if you learned something from this, and then also share it if you're able to, so that other people know and understand some of the risk factors and why we get worried about measles. It's super contagious, and there's a lot of really significant sequelae that can happen in the midst of measles infection and then after the fact too, with the amnesia and the SPE and all those sorts of things. Hopefully this is helpful. Keep up the good work.